The apple blossoms had come and gone 3 weeks ago, and Clara Hennessey had not eaten a proper meal since before they fell. She sat on the edge of a dry creek bed, her boots off, her feet blistered from 2 days of walking the road east out of Dalton Springs. The town had swallowed everything: the house her father built, the furniture her mother chose piece by piece, and finally the mercantile her husband had run for 4 years before a bad winter and a worse loan took it all. Thomas had been dead 6 months, and the creditors had been efficient. They left her a carpet bag, a wool coat too heavy for May, and the quiet dignity of a woman who refused to weep in front of men in suits. She was 23 years old. She had a good mind, a strong back, and exactly nowhere to go. The road she sat beside cut through the open grassland of eastern Montana like a shallow wound. Fence lines ran parallel to it on both sides, taut and well kept, the kind of fencing that spoke of someone who took their land seriously. She studied one post as if it might tell her something useful. It did not. She pulled a heel of bread from her coat pocket, the last of what a kind woman in Dalton Springs had pressed into her hands 2 mornings ago. She ate it in 3 careful bites, making each one last. The sound reached her before she saw anything. Iron wheels on hard-packed earth, the complaint of a wagon that had seen better years, and the steady plod of 2 draft horses who did not hurry for anyone. She put her boots back on. The wagon was driven by an older man, heavyset, with a sunburned neck and a gray beard that had given up trying to hold a shape. Beside him sat a younger man who was looking at something on the horizon, with the kind of focused stillness that suggested he looked at things carefully before deciding what to do about them. He was broad across the shoulders, with dark hair showing beneath the brim of a work-worn hat. The older man pulled up when he saw her standing there, bootlaces still untied. "Miss." The older man touched his hat. His eyes went to the carpet bag at her feet and back to her face, not unkindly. The younger man said nothing. He looked at her the way he had looked at the horizon, steady, unhurried, taking inventory. "I'm not in distress," Clara said, because she had found that saying so first gave her some control over the conversation. "I'm traveling east." "Ain't much east of here," the older man said. "Not for 40 miles. The younger man spoke then. His voice was level and quiet, with no particular inflection. "Do you know figures?" Clara blinked. Of all the questions she had braced herself for, "Where are you headed? Where's your husband? Don't you have family somewhere?" that was not among them. "I beg your pardon?" "Arithmetic," he said. "Ledger work. Do you know it?" She had kept the books for the mercantile for 4 years. She had caught 3 errors in the bank's own accounting statements and had been correct each time, a fact the bank had never once acknowledged. "I know it well enough," she said. He nodded once, as if that settled something. "Harlan," he said to the older man, and the older man moved over on the bench to make room. His name was Reid Calloway. She learned that from Harlan, who talked enough for both of them on the 40-minute drive to the Calloway ranch. Reid owned the spread, had built it himself starting at 19, Harlan said, which made him 31 now. His father had left him the land and approximately nothing else. The ranch ran cattle and a small horse operation. They were heading into their summer range season, and the ledger work had gotten away from them. The man who'd been keeping the books had taken a job with the railroad 2 weeks ago, and the territory land assessor was due in July. "He needs somebody who can read a column of numbers and not make a mess of it," Harlan said cheerfully. Reid stared at the road. Clara straightened her back against the wagon bench and said nothing, but something in her chest, a tight, cold thing that had lived there since the morning the creditors came eased by a fraction. The Calloway ranch house was made of squared timber and river stone, 2 stories, with a porch that ran the full length of the front and a kitchen addition that had been built onto the back with less artistry but considerable practicality. It was not beautiful. It was solid, the kind of structure that had been built to outlast whoever built it. Inside, the main room served as both a sitting area and an office of sorts. A roll-top desk in the corner was buried under a geological formation of papers, receipts, tallies, and at least one letter that appeared to have been fried in bacon grease at some point. 3 ranch hands' worth of mud was ground into the floor near the door. The curtains were the color of dust, because they were, in fact, covered in it. Clara set her bag down. She walked to the desk, moved 3 layers of paper aside with the careful precision of someone diffusing something, and found the ledger underneath. She opened it, looked at the last 6 months of entries, looked again. "This column hasn't been carried forward since February," she said. "I know," Reid said from the doorway. He was watching her the same way he'd watched the horizon from the wagon seat. "And this entry here," she pointed, "this is $140 marked as feed expenditure. But the notation says wire and post. Which was it?" "Wire and post." "Then it's miscategorized. And if the assessor sees a $140 discrepancy between your supply invoices and your ledger entries, he is going to ask you a great many questions you'll find irritating." She looked up. "I'll need a chair that doesn't rock, a pot of coffee, and 2 days. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was adjacent to one. "Harlan," he said, without looking away from her, "bring the lady a chair from the kitchen." She had the February column corrected by nightfall. She had the full first quarter reconciled by the following afternoon, cross-referenced against every invoice she could find, which she organized into chronological order by date and stuffed into a leather folder she discovered behind the wood box. When Reid came in from the evening rounds and found her still at the desk, the kerosene lamp burning low, a neat stack of completed pages at her left elbow and a shorter stack of queries at her right, he stood in the doorway for a long moment. "You eat?" he said. "I forgot," she said, which was honest. He went to the kitchen and came back with a plate of cold biscuits and a piece of ham and set them beside her without comment. She ate without looking up from the ledger. He sat down in the chair by the window and read through her completed pages in silence. "You found the Hendricks error," he said after a while. "You were billed twice for the same load of lumber in October. $14. She turned a page. "I wrote to the Hendricks yard in the margin. You'll want to send that letter." He set the pages down. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not suspicion, not surprise exactly. More like a man who had expected to find a candle and had found something that burned considerably brighter. "Room and board, plus $4 a week," he said. "Until the assessment is done." Clara looked at the remaining pile of ledger work, which was substantial. "5, she said. "And I'll need access to all the land deed files, not just the operating accounts." He was quiet for a moment. "Done," he said. The summer passed in the rhythm of work. Clara had been given the small room off the kitchen, which had a window that faced east and caught the morning light beautifully. She was at her desk before the ranch hands finished their first coffee. She cataloged 6 years of records. She found 4 additional billing errors, 2 of which resulted in modest refunds from suppliers who apparently had not expected to be caught. She organized the deed files, mapped the grazing allotments against the recorded parcel boundaries, and built a clear accounting of every head of cattle, every fence repair, every water trough and salt lick on the property. The ranch hands watched her with the cautious curiosity men reserve for things they don't quite know how to categorize. She was not a cook. She was not a wife. She was not exactly what any of them had a word for. But when she quietly informed the youngest hand, a 19-year-old named Pete, that he had been underpaid by $6 over 3 months due to a tallying error in his timesheet, and presented him with the corrected amount from the petty cash, his wariness dissolved entirely. After that, the hands treated her with a careful, respectful deference, the kind they might show a school teacher or a doctor. Reid Calloway was harder to read. He was not unfriendly. He was not cold. He simply operated in a register of economy that left very little visible on the surface. He said what was necessary and nothing more. He fixed the broken latch on her window shutters without being asked, and said nothing about it. He left a stack of new ledger books on her desk one morning with a note that said only, "Assessor moved to August," in handwriting that was surprisingly deliberate and clean. He asked her, once, if the lamp in her office was giving adequate light, and when she said it was a little dim, a better lamp appeared the following morning. Clara noticed. She was a woman who noticed things. She noticed the way he listened when she spoke, with his full attention, which was rarer than most people understood. She noticed that he never spoke over her, never explained something back to her that she had just explained to him, never looked past her to one of the hands when there was a decision to be made that fell within her domain. She also noticed the thing he carried without speaking about it. A photograph on the mantelpiece, turned slightly away from the room. A woman, younger than Clara, with a direct expression and her hair pinned up. Gone 2 years, Harlan told her quietly one afternoon. Fever, same as half the county that winter. Reid had sold 2 horses to pay the doctor, and it hadn't made any difference. Clara did not ask Reid about it. She understood the weight of a grief that had become structural, part of the frame you lived inside. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday, which Clara had begun to suspect was the universe's preferred day for delivering catastrophe. The man's name was Aldous Fitch, and he arrived in a rented buggy from the county seat with a leather satchel and a confidence that did not belong to him. He was perhaps 50, with the papery skin of a man who spent his days indoors and the eyes of someone who had learned to find the weakness in a situation before he announced himself in it. He represented, he explained to Reid on the front porch, the Territorial Land and Cattle Consolidation Company out of Denver. Clara, who was at her desk with the window open, heard every word. The pitch was smooth and practiced. The company, Fitch explained, was buying up grazing rights across the territory in advance of what he called the coming consolidation of the range. Smaller operations, he said, with the sympathetic gravity of a man delivering news he had not invented, were going to find themselves squeezed out in the next 3 to 5 years by the large eastern cattle syndicates moving west. The smart move was to sell the grazing rights now, while the company was paying fair value. Keep the land, sell the rights, walk away with capital to invest in something more here, he paused, modern. Reid's voice was flat. I'm not selling. Fitch's voice shifted, barely perceptibly, into something with a sharper edge underneath. Mr. Calloway, I've reviewed the public assessment records. Your eastern quarter, the 40 acres along Crow Creek, is listed under provisional title, pending confirmation of boundary survey. That survey, as I understand it, has not been formally completed and filed. A silence on the porch. Clara set her pen down. Without that filing, Fitch continued, with the ease of a man who had done this before, the eastern parcel is legally vulnerable. A competing claim could tie the land up in territorial court for 2-3 years. That's 2 or 3 years of disrupted grazing, interrupted water access to your summer range, and considerable legal expense. He let that settle. The company is prepared to be generous, given the circumstances. It was not quite a threat. It was the shape of a threat, dressed in the language of concern. Clara stood up. She went to the deed file cabinet. She had spent 3 weeks with those files, every deed, every survey notation, every piece of correspondence with the Territorial Land Office that had accumulated over 6 years. Her fingers moved through the folders with the ease of someone who had organized them herself, because she had. She found what she was looking for. She also found something else, something she had noted weeks ago, and filed without yet understanding its full significance. She walked to the front porch. Fitch looked at her with the mild, dismissive attention a man of his type gave to women who appeared in business conversations uninvited. "Miss," he began. "Mrs. Hennessey," Clara said. She did not look at him. She looked at Reid. "May I?" Reid studied her face for a moment. Then he stepped slightly to the side to make room for her. She set the 2 documents on the porch railing. "The boundary survey for the eastern parcel was completed," she said, her voice calm and entirely clear. "September of 1887. It's in the land office records under filing number 4471B. She tapped the first document, a copy of the survey confirmation she had found tucked inside a folded cattle tally sheet, almost certainly forgotten. Mr. Calloway's predecessor filed it before the transfer of deed. It was recorded. It is not provisional. Fitch's eyes moved to the paper, a small tightening around his jaw. Furthermore, Clara continued, the eastern quarter along Crow Creek is not 40 acres. It is 53 acres. She set down the second document. The 1,887 survey corrected a drafting error from the original 1,881 land grant. The boundary runs to the second stone marker past the creek bend, not the first. The additional 13 acres include the natural spring that feeds the summer grazing field. She looked at Fitch directly for the first time, which I imagine your company was already aware of, given that a water source of that kind would substantially increase the value of any grazing rights purchased here. The porch was very quiet. A meadowlark called from somewhere out in the grass. Fitch's smooth, professional expression had not collapsed, but it had developed a fracture. He looked at the documents. He looked at Clara. He looked at Reid Calloway, who was leaning against the porch post with his arms crossed and an expression of absolute composure on his face. Your survey confirmation was incorrectly filed and would need to be. Fitch began. I have the filing receipt, Clara said. She had anticipated this. She pulled the third paper from under her arm. The land office clerk's stamp and signature. The 3rd of October 1887. The filing is valid. Fitch picked up his satchel. He looked at the papers one more time, with the expression of a man mentally calculating what he had walked into versus what he had expected. He settled his hat. I'll relay your position to the company, he said, with as much dignity as he could recover. You do that, Reid said. They watched the rented buggy until it disappeared around the bend in the road. One of the hands, who had been repairing a bridle on the fence post nearby and had heard the entire exchange, let out a low sound of satisfaction and went back to his work. Reid did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the 3 documents Clara was holding, the survey confirmation, the boundary correction, the filing receipt, and then he looked at her. How long have you had those? He said. I found the survey confirmation in week 2, she said. I filed it separately because I wasn't certain of its relevance yet. The boundary correction I identified by comparing the 1881 grant language to the 1,887 survey notes. The filing receipt was in the same folder as the survey, tucked behind it. I kept them together once I understood what they meant. She paused. I didn't know about the company until today, but land along a water source in territory like this is always going to attract attention eventually. It seemed worth being prepared. Reid looked at her for a long moment. The afternoon light was coming at a low angle, painting the porch boards gold, and somewhere behind them in the kitchen, the dinner Harlan had started was beginning to smell of onions and roasting meat. You could have had that wrong, he said. Not an accusation, an observation. I could have, she agreed. I wasn't. And then something happened that Clara had not seen before in all the weeks she had been at the Calloway ranch. Reid Calloway smiled. It was not a large smile. It was not a performed smile. It was the quiet, involuntary expression of a man whose guard had come down without his permission, and it changed his face entirely, made him look younger and unguarded, and more like the boy who had started building something at 19 than the man who had been carrying it alone for too long. He turned and went inside, and Clara stood on the porch for an extra moment in the golden light, holding her papers. She was not a woman who let herself move too quickly toward things. She had learned caution the hard way, in the offices of creditors and the silences of a marriage that had been decent but not sustaining. She knew the difference between gratitude and something more durable. She was not going to confuse them, but she was also a woman who knew what a column of numbers was telling her, and she had learned that ignoring clear data was always more expensive than facing it honestly. The weeks after Fitch's visit changed the rhythm of the ranch in ways that were difficult to name precisely. The hands were more settled, their confidence visible in small ways, a straighter back at supper, less quarreling over nothing. Word had gotten around the county, the way word did, that something had happened at the Calloway place, that a woman with a ledger book and a memory for dates had faced down a man from Denver and sent him away empty-handed. Clara noticed, when she rode to Dalton Springs with Harlan to file the surveyor's confirmation directly with the land office herself, that the clerk knew who she was. Reid began to include her in conversations. She had not previously been invited to discussions with the horse buyer from Billings, the planning meeting for the fall cattle drive, a difficult negotiation with a neighboring rancher over a shared fence line that ran along the northern boundary. He did not defer to her in these conversations. He did not perform the theater of asking her opinion when he had already decided. He simply made room for her at the table, and when she spoke, he listened the same way he always listened, with his full attention, taking what was useful, leaving what wasn't, without making a production of either. She found, in those conversations, that his mind worked in straight lines, the same way hers did. He was not a man for sentiment or ornamentation. He saw what was in front of him and made decisions based on what was there. The difference between them was that he saw land and animals and weather, and she saw numbers and patterns and the logic that ran beneath the surface of things. Together, they saw more than either of them had seen alone. She did not let herself name what was happening. She filed it, the same way she had filed the survey confirmation noted, set aside, not yet fully understood. September arrived with a cold bite in the morning air, and the particular golden quality of light that meant the summer was ending seriously. The land assessor came and went in 2 days, satisfied, his report noting a well-maintained and clearly documented operation. The Calloway ranch passed without complication or question. The evening after the assessor left, Clara sat at the desk with a finished ledger in front of her and nothing particular left to do with it. The job she had been hired for was complete. She was aware of this in the same way she was aware of the cold air coming in at the window's edge. As a fact, she had been keeping peripheral for some time. She heard him on the porch before he knocked on the open door frame. He always moved that way, as if he was aware of the space he occupied. "Assessment's done," she said. "Yes." He came in and stood by the window, looking out at the last light on the hills. He had his hat in his hands. She had learned that this meant he was thinking carefully about what he was going to say. "I've been thinking," he began, which was, for him, practically a preamble. "You're wondering if I have somewhere to go," she said. He looked at her. "Do you?" She considered honesty, which was her natural inclination, and usually the most efficient approach. "No," she said. "Not particularly." He nodded slowly. He turned the hat in his hands. "The spring assessment will be due in April. The cattle operation is expanding. I'm buying a second breeding stallion from the Billings buyer in November." He paused. "The ledger work isn't going to get smaller." She waited. "I'd like you to stay on," he said. "Permanently." He looked at her directly, and his voice, which had always been level, was level now in the particular way of a man who is being more careful than usual. Not as an employee. The lamp on her desk made a small sound, the wick needing adjustment. Clara set her pen down. She thought of the woman in the photograph on the mantelpiece, and she thought of her own quiet grief for Thomas, which had been the grief of losing a companion rather than a great love, but which had still been real, and which she had carried alone. She thought of what it meant to be seen clearly by someone, not as a charity case, not as a curiosity, but as a person doing a job and doing it well, and respected for exactly that. She thought about the feel of the ranch in the morning, the way the light came through the eastern window of the small room, the satisfying weight of a well-organized ledger, the sound of the hands talking over supper, the particular quality of the silence when she and Reid were both working on the same problem and had both, for the moment, arrived at the same understanding. "I would want a proper chair in the office," she said. "Not the one with the short leg." The corner of his mouth moved. "Done. And I'll want to continue handling the land correspondence directly, not through an intermediary." "Agreed." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not an easy woman, Reid. I argue with numbers when they're wrong, and I'll argue with you when you're wrong. I expect to be heard." "You've been arguing since the first morning," he said. "I haven't found it a hardship." She almost smiled. "Then yes," she said. "I'll stay." They were married in November, on a cold Saturday in the Dalton Springs church, with Harlan standing up beside Reid and Pete, the youngest hand, inexplicably crying and being quietly elbowed by the man next to him. Clara wore a blue dress she had made herself from fabric she'd ordered from the catalog, simple and well-fitted, because she was not a woman who did things halfway. Reid wore his good coat and had clearly attempted something with his hair that had partially succeeded. The supper afterward was held at the ranch. and Clara had organized it herself because she was not capable of leaving large logistical decisions to chance. The hands ate until they couldn't, and then ate some more. Harlan gave a toast that wandered through several unrelated topics before arriving, by a circuitous route, at genuine sentiment. There was dancing of a sort, in the cleared space in front of the barn, with Pete playing a fiddle with more enthusiasm than technical precision. Late that night, when the last of the hands had gone back to the bunkhouse and the yard was quiet under a sky crowded with stars, Reid and Clara stood on the porch. The cold was sharp and clean, carrying the smell of pine and coming snow. He took her hand, her fingers settled against his, easy and certain. "You know," he said after a while, "when I saw you sitting by that creek bed with your boots off and your bread down to the last piece, I thought you were the most stubborn-looking woman I had ever seen in my life." "I was trying to appear composed," she said. "I know," he said. "That was the stubborn part." She leaned her head against his shoulder. The stars were very bright. The ranch was quiet around them, solid and real, the kind of thing that had been built to last. 5 years later, in the spring, Clara Calloway sat at the desk that had long since become hers, a better chair, properly leveled with the county land assessment report for the Calloway estate spread open in front of her. The operation had grown. There were 3 separate parcels now, including the northern 40 that Reid had purchased 2 winters ago, and a small but profitable horse breeding program that had developed its own regional reputation. The spring books were in excellent order, as they always were. Outside the window, the hills were greening up after the snow, bright and improbable in the April light. She could hear the hands starting their morning work. She could hear Reid's voice, unhurried and certain, carrying from somewhere near the corral. She heard, too, a small commotion from the hallway, 2 pairs of feet, one larger and one smaller, and a question being asked in the particular urgent register of a 4-year-old with a very pressing concern. The door opened, and a small girl with Clara's dark eyes and Reid's careful steadiness looked at her with an expression of tremendous seriousness. "Papa says you know where the extra rope is. Barn, south wall, 3rd hook down," Clara said, without looking up from the ledger. The small girl considered this information, found it satisfactory, and left, her feet retreating at speed down the hall. A moment later, Reid appeared in the doorway. He looked at her with the same expression he had worn on the porch that first night, when he had found the kitchen transformed and his plate waiting not quite readable, but something under it that she had learned, over 5 years, to recognize as a kind of contentment too deep for simpler words. "Fitch's company went bankrupt," he said. "Saw it in the territorial paper." "I saw." She turned a page in the ledger. "They overextended in the northern range." Poor arithmetic. He made a sound that, in another man, would have been a laugh. In Reid Calloway, it was a quiet, certain thing, worn smooth by years of use. He crossed the room. He looked at the open ledger over her shoulder, at the clean columns and the careful notations, and then out the window at the greening hills and the bright, wide sky. "Good spring," he said. "Very good spring," she agreed. He put his hand on her shoulder, brief and sure. The way he touched things he trusted and intended to keep. Then he went back out into the morning, and Clara Hennessey Calloway turned to the next page of the ledger and kept on. Sometimes, the most important thing a person can carry isn't money or connections. It's the willingness to keep showing up and doing the work carefully, even when no one is watching. Clara didn't save the ranch with luck. She saved it with attention, the kind that notices a misfiled survey and a forgotten spring and 13 acres no one else bothered to count. What you know, and what you do quietly with what you know, has a way of mattering exactly when it needs to. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a little entertainment and, tucked inside it, a life lesson worth keeping.